trained about half the exorcists in America, which is wild. He's like one of two laymen that are invited to the Rome for the exorcist meetings and all that stuff. And he tells me all the craziest stories. And I'm like, how do you sleep at night? And he said, oh, that's not a problem at all. I'm like, I'm scared. Like, this is crazy. And he said, when you see the hand of God work, you never wonder if he exists. I feel so bad for the vast majority of people who sleep easy not knowing God is real. Right? So this is what we're working for. We're working to help men see the hand of God in their lives. We're working to create places where men can come as men, not agendas, none of this stuff. This is why I love That Man Is You. So a little bit about me and my background. Evangelization is my thing. I love going around and talking. I go to college at campuses and stuff like that. Not like Charlie Kirk or something like that. I just go and do ministry in Catholic student centers and stuff. And I sit there for hours and hours and I get to know the people. I get to know their struggles. You know, I try my best to pour into them. And then I get in the car and I go home to my wife and kids. It's a weird dynamic. What I realize is my job is to evangelize the evangelizers. Right? St. Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2 said, Paul, called out Timothy. Now he's asking Timothy to find men who will be good teachers to teach yet more still men. Right? This is 4 generations of discipleship replication. 2 Timothy 2:2. Read that, internalize that. This is what we're doing. This is why I'm here. God has poured into me by so many amazing people in my life. I hope that I can give you one fraction of what's been given to me so that when you go back to your parish, you look at it and you say, how can we conquer this parish for the kingdom of God? Right? Because a lot of our parishes are falling apart. Right? I was in a diocese where they went from 216 churches to 43. To 43. Many of those churches were over 100, 150 years old. Like, it is shrinking so many places. But then you hear online, young adults, it's starting to grow all like pockets. Like in New York City, it's exploding. The young adult population going to mass, mostly traditional masses, but not entirely, is exploding. So this is my hope for you. This is my hope for you. That we begin to see that men need more than just, hey, here's the mass times. They're already doing that. The faithful men are already doing that. The less engaged men are starting to drift away. Why? Because we aren't inviting them into something that changes their life. We're not. You guys have taken that invitation. You saw it and said, my God and my people are demanding more of me. And so you stood before the bishop and you received the sacrament and you became a deacon because you know that the type of challenge that Christ has called you into requires more grace than what is afforded to just laymen. You guys are at the bridge between the laity and the clergy. Many of you are married or were married at one point. You have chosen this life of dedicated service, to be waiters in the kingdom of heaven, right? To manage tables, right? To serve at tables. You guys are doing this because you see a need that is so great out there. And this is what burns in my soul about the men that we do work with, right? My parish that I came from, I'm not at that parish anymore, but I was there for about 15 years. My parish has 7,000 families, 22,000 individuals. And we have 100 men show up every week. Now, it's a big group, 100 men. We fill the room, the only room that we have available for them. We fill it up starting at 5:30 in the morning on a Friday morning. Who wants to do that, right? But they do it, and they come weekly, young and old. We have a pretty good mixed group of ages. And they show up, and they put in the time, and they are committed. And I had someone say, oh, isn't this great? It's one of the biggest groups in Houston. And I said, no, it's not. Satan's men's group is much bigger. Because Satan's men's group sleeps in. Satan's men's group skips Sunday Mass. Right? Satan's men's groups is falling apart. Their marriages are falling apart because they got Pornhub. Right? They get to do their church online. Right? See, this is the thing. We are fighting. Like, we got to stop thinking like here in That Man Is You, we keep track of how many, we're in 1,200 parishes, right? But how many homes are we in with the gospel? How many men have been formed with the gospel? That's what I care about. That's what I want to see accomplished. So what are some of the things? So this is what men's ministry is supposed to do. It's supposed to be scaffolding. Right? It's supposed to be scaffolding that because modernity, this modern world that we live in, is so alienating to male community, to community in general, but male community in particular, it's so alienating that we have to build something artificial. Hey, come here early in the morning. We're going to watch these videos. We're going to have small group. I got to train your small group leaders so they don't turn everything into a DNC or RNC convention, right? We're going to try to keep politics out so we can keep faith front and center. We're going to talk about your marriages. I know, like, who wants it? Like, hey, men, I want you to get in a circle with people you don't know and share your feelings, right? No one wants to do that, right? So we build it around the things that matter most in our faith, in our religion, in our life. But it is artificial. Let's be honest, all this stuff. Because it used to be natural. Right? This was a big component of my talk, so I'm going to kind of compress what I did last night for 45 minutes into 5 minutes. But if you think about the history of civilization, we were agrarian or we were tribal. Which meant, have any of you ever seen Mel Gibson's Apocalypto? Okay, Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, me and my wife rewatched that. Not exactly husband and wife cuddle material, but we watched Apocalypto, and my favorite part of that movie is just the opening, like, 45 minutes, where you just see the tribe living. And I'm like, look at this tribe. Number one, the men love their wives. They love their kids. But, like, the men really have camaraderie with one another. And they keep making fun of this one guy over and over again. So funny. But they love each other. And that's why the story rips your heart apart when the invading army comes in, all this stuff. But the reality is this, for most men, for most of human history, in agrarian cultures, a man's place was in the home. We worked at home. We worked with our wives and with our children. Young boys worked underneath their fathers. They knew who they were. They knew where they fit in, where they belonged. They were raised near aunts and uncles. For almost the entire history of the human race, you died 5 miles from where you were born. That was what does that mean? Everyone knows you. Right? Everyone knows your stuff, your history, your background. Everyone knows you. And you know everyone else. You don't have to go on a 3-week yoga retreat with a bunch of goats in the middle of nowhere to find yourself. Right? You know who you are. You know where you fit in. You know where you belong. And you know where you contribute. I will never forget this. Dr. Scott Hahn said this years ago, before I was ever a student of his. And he said, the most important thing about youth ministry, because he used to do youth ministry before his conversion, he said, is that you get the youth to belong and to contribute. We get really good at doing the one, and we get really good at ignoring the other. Like, you never really belong until you actually feel like you're building the common mission, right? So, if we look at the 300,000 year lifespan of Homo sapiens, right? What did we do? We lived in communities, we lived in tribes. When we settled down into the Neolithic era, what did we do? We built communities around farmland and flocks and herds. We knew everyone knew us. We were bound by seasons and time and all of that stuff, and we were hyper-localized. And now what are we? We live in a global flat culture. Right? Famously, one of the princes of the church, one of these cardinals, gave an address during the Second Vatican Conference where they had trouble translating the phrase that he used, which was blue jeans, right, into Latin. Right? They had a little trouble with that one because he was saying, like, you used to have folk dress. Like, people from different places had a distinct type of clothing that they wore. Right? When I used to go to Guatemala, one of the things that they did, they had the patterns in their garments that showed where they belong, similar to the Scottish and Irish kilts. Like, oh, you know what clan, you know what household you're a part of by the patterns of your dress and all of these different things. But then in the 80s, during the Guatemalan Civil War, they began lining men up and shooting them to make sure that they wiped out entire families. Right? And so I go there as a high school student, and I find this out, and I was sharing this story, and a guy was like, I'm from Guatemala. I was raised in the middle of this war. He said, I was a little kid walking to school, and it was not uncommon to see men with their heads blown off in the ditch next to the street. As I'm walking, he's like, it was really hard growing up in this environment. We got to America as soon as we could because it was so violent. And he said, but that's what they were doing. That's why many of the women, we were up in the mountains with the Quiche people, but the women all wear their traditional dress, but the men refused to. For the most part, they were, in my encounters with them, they refused to because they saw their brothers get killed or their dads and uncles get killed. right? It's wild, right? But think about this. We all had our traditional dress, right? I just did the walk around the Memorial Gardens, right? I started with Our Lady of Lavang, right? The traditional dress, right? Now we all over the world are wearing blue jeans, right? Isn't that funny? This is the homogenization of our culture. That it's kind of like stamped these things out. The only time you see a German wearing lederhosen is during Oktoberfest, right? And it's just to get drunk, right? Like, and it's the same thing about St. Patty's Day, right? That's the only time I bust out my leprechaun hat. But the idea of all this stuff is 150 years ago, we had industrialization where work was away from family. Just think about that. Work is away from family. Have any of you ever been on a pilgrimage to Assisi, France? Right? Beautiful city. You're walking around, you're in Umbria, you go up the mountain, you're walking through the town. Downstairs is the shops, upstairs is where they lived. They worked at home. Murderously close to their kids, right? High school didn't hit for families like that like it does for us, where it's nothing but a war. You know, we all joke, oh, they're rebellious teenage years. That didn't happen in teenage years because there wasn't a thing called adolescence. This is the big thing that I learned. When you research human history, there was one world, one culture. It was called the adult world. And kids were a little circle inside that world. And once you were done being a child, you were an adult. And that was around the age of 13. Different cultures, different times, but around the age of 13. Right? Bar mitzvahs, things like that. Male initiation rituals made a boy a man. And afterwards, he was not a boy. He then, from that point on, had male adult responsibilities. Right? You weren't allowed to stay back with the women during the hunt. You then had to take your spear and go into the hunt. Right? Like these things radically altered their social world, the way they perceive the world. Where are our male initiation rites? They don't exist. The Western world completely got rid of them because we were too smart. Now we have this thing called adolescence. Adolescence did not exist in 1900. Adolescence came into being as a sociological phenomenon in the 1920s and 30s. Mostly in the 30s. Why? Because of the Great Depression and truancy laws to keep boys out of getting jobs for head of household men, right? Because jobs were hard to come by. So what happened was they said, oh, you got to be in high school till your sophomore year. So all these boys began staying in school instead of in 7th grade or 5th grade, whenever they traditionally leave. They stayed till their sophomore, junior year in high school. Within 20 years, there was a whole culture called high school. Right? The Leatherman jacket, right? Archie comics type stuff that you think of the 1950s, the poodle skirts and all that. But what begins happening every decade from the 1920s onward? New radical forms of music that are characterized and catered directly to the young. Starts with jazz and swing and big band, then it goes on and on and on, then you get rock and roll, and then you get the 60s. At the end of the 60s, that's where you have this development of youth culture completely separate from the development of adult culture. You had antagonism between the two. You had an animosity between adults and youth. But what happened in the later years? In the 60s, you know what else started? Because visionary people recognized this, youth ministry began in the Protestant world. That's when Youth for Christ started, Campus Crusade, all of these big things to evangelize youth and young adults. That's when Boy Scouts really began spreading throughout America. That's when Little League was started. All of these things were started because they realized boys and girls need help transitioning into adulthood successfully. And our current systems are not serving them. By the time you get to the 90s, those things invented by adults to serve kids into adulthood became inverted to where the kids serve the careers of the adults. Now you have superintendents getting their salaries raised because they want to hire the football coach, and the coach's offer is, well, I want to make this amount of $300,000-$400,000 to be a high school football coach, and I can't make more than the superintendent. So jack up her salaries, you can jack up my salary. Right? All of a sudden, high school sports, now anyone ever involved in youth sports knows how crazy it is. I have a friend who was a college volleyball player, full scholarship. That's what she did, full scholarship. She would workouts in the summer, practice started right before school, or right at the beginning of the school year, and their season went until November to January, whatever volleyball schedule is, and then it ended. And then they didn't see him again until the next summer. Now they're doing two-a-days, they got to go to conditioning, you got to be on track team, and that's for middle school kids. Right? This is insane. We are destroying youth for the sake of adults' careers. for the sake of your local senior high, whatever. But it's not becoming the initiation ritual into adulthood that we had hoped. Because the adult world and the youth world are at odds with one another. And now it's being commercialized to death. Why does this matter? Because young men who are increasingly displaced from society by young women, not because the women are evil, but because the type of work needed is mostly relational, right? It's non-physical, right? Corporations, just by that mode of existence, did more to destroy masculinity than anything else. Why? Because it no longer depended on your physical strength like factory work did, like blue-collar jobs did, right? Now, I'm not saying, and this is not a us versus them thing. See, that's the dichotomy that I think too many people get caught up in. This is why I love That Man Is You. One of the reasons why I joined is because I said, you're able to talk about men's vocation without trashing women. It drives me nuts. Like all this like manosphere stuff on the internet, all these pro-men and men's rights and all this stuff. It's like, you want to know why men are awesome? Because women are terrible. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to fly in the kingdom of God, right? But you see, but men are desperate. They're hungry to fit in, to belong, to be a part of something. And what is the church giving them? Be nice. That's the message we're giving young boys. Well, Jesus wants you to be nice. Are you freaking kidding me? Oh, let me give my life to Jesus Christ so I can be nice. Like that's it. That's it. You know what nice comes from? That word is a Latin compound. Non scio. It means an idiot. Non scio means he doesn't know. Right? That's what the word nice, like to be a nice guy. It's kind of like calling someone a fellow because it comes from the same root word as felon. Language is fun. But here's the ideal. Is that the Christian ideal of a man? Or is it St. Peter? Is it St. Paul? Is it St. Stephen? Is it men who committed themselves at the sacrificial service of other people? Is it men who realize that Christ has blessed me so much, who am I to hold on to this blessing? It has to be radiated outwards. All the stories of the heroes that we tell. I mean, we have the Vietnamese martyrs with all of those panels outside. Have you been there, right? You saw the Our Lady of Levant. I'm walking around trying to get around the construction, which apparently is everywhere at this place. And I'm walking around, and I look over, and I'm like, oh, this is the martyrs. And all those panels describing the different martyrs. Have you seen those? Yeah. This is incredible. These are people who gave their lives so that men and women in this community right here could still praise the name of Jesus Christ. Their children. This is the legacy that we stand in. So what are we offering men when we're inviting them into a relationship with the Lord Jesus? Are we inviting them on an adventure? Or are we telling them to be nice? This one guy, actually not too far from here, at a evangelical church, he was a gang member, pretty rough Latino gang, and the pastor reached out to him, evangelized him, discipled him, brought him into the church, and the kid came to everything all the time, and then he left the church, and the pastor went out and found him. About 3 months later, kind of in the old neighborhood, and he said, what are you doing? Why'd you leave? You were like my most fervent member. And he said, you know, when I joined the church, I thought it was kind of like joining the gang. He's like, okay. And he's like, you get jumped in, but then you're a part of a brotherhood. Your whole life is built around the gang. He said, I didn't realize what I joined. He said, well, what'd you join? And he said, a thing I do for an hour on Sunday. A thing I do for an hour on Sunday. A gangbanger found that empty. When I work alongside the men that go to Honduras, and then they go to the prison ministry, and then they give their lives to the prison ministry, to these inmates. And then you see other men who go into nursing homes where humanity has warehoused and forgotten. Hey, Medicaid covers it, all their assets were taken, they're fine. People who have been forgotten. You see men who say, I will not forget you. I think about my grandfather, in-law, my wife's grandfather. He died in a VA hospital. My wife said that her mother was in the hospital. I don't know if every VA hospital is like this, but this one, I had mentioned to somebody, he said, oh, it doesn't sound like mine. But when a veteran dies, so number one, there's always a nurse who sits beside the bed of a veteran who's dying, so that no soldier dies alone. That's incredible. That's incredible. And then when a soldier dies, they sound a particular chime or bell, and the whole hospital stops. And they take a few moments of silence, and then they go about it. And the mom was there, my wife's mom was there, and she said, what was that? And they said, a veteran has died. A soldier has died. So we give him respect, right? And she was like so amazed. And then he would pass a few days after that. She was so amazed at that, right? That this is what we do. In the early church, in the times of ancient Rome, when Christianity was still illegal, you know this, if a woman had a baby and they didn't want it, they would just put the baby in a forest or throw a baby in a river. It's called the exposure of infants. Now what that meant was, it was, according to Roman and Greek mythology, if you killed a baby, you would be hounded by the Furies. If you shed an innocent blood, the Furies would hound you and destroy you. So what they would do is just leave the baby outside and let nature take its course. Die of exposure, mostly of wild animals. So what Christians would do is they knew where this would happen, and they would go and rescue those babies. Right? Because that's what Christians do. They rescue babies. Right? St. Nicholas, giving money to poor women so they don't have to give their lives over to prostitution. Because that's what Christians do. They give of themselves generously so that people can be saved out of poverty, out of making horrible moral compromises. I met a man who's a dentist out in, was it Scranton? Oh man, this stinks. I go to so many places now, I can't even remember where I was. Sometimes I call my wife and I go, where am I right now? Yesterday I called her and I said, what day is it? I mean, I know it says the 24th on my phone. Am I right? Okay, and she's like, oh man, you need to sleep. But she's a liar, I just need more caffeine. This nun walked by, this little girl at a trash dump in, where was it? I can't remember. It was in Mexico, and she runs this religious order. It's an incredible order, and she sees this little girl holding a sign, and the sign, the girl can't read it, and in Spanish it says, "Will trade me for goat." And the goat price there was $40. So the nun's like, take me to your mom. And so she goes, and she's like 4 or 5 other brothers and sisters living in one of these shanty towns right along the side of the river. And the nun starts talking, right? And they start interacting. And meets the mom. The mom had spent all night in prostitution, all this stuff. They live in the dumps. The dumps are controlled by cartels. The cartels pay the little children to go and get scraps and stuff, but it's really that they're watching them until they get a certain age, and they just kidnap them. And then they sell them, right? And this little girl was about to get caught up into that world